My husband stood across the courtroom from me with a look I had never seen before, not love, not even anger, but certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from believing you have already won. His lawyer's hand rested confidently on a thick folder, and mine sat beside me with only a thin stack of papers. The judge adjusted her glasses, glanced at the documents, and then spoke words that echoed in my head long after the gavel struck. The house went to him. The savings went to him. The investments went to him. Even the car I drove was now legally his. By the time the judge finished, there was almost nothing left to say. I walked out of that courtroom with a small handbag, a few clothes, and a reputation that my husband had carefully destroyed over months. People whispered as I passed. Some avoided my eyes. Others looked at me with pity, as if I were already finished. He didn't even try to hide his smile. Outside the courthouse, he stopped me. The sun was bright, too bright for the moment. I told you, he said quietly, leaning in just enough that only I could hear. You should have listened. You should have stayed in your place. I looked at him and said nothing. That silence bothered him more than any argument ever had. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. Where are you going to go now? He asked. You don't have anything. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. I don't. He walked away satisfied, already pulling out his phone, probably calling someone to celebrate. I watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling the weight of everything I had lost settle on my shoulders. For a moment, a very small moment, I let myself feel it. The fear, the exhaustion, the sense of being erased. Then I breathed out and reminded myself of something I had learned the hard way. People who take everything rarely check what you kept hidden. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. It smelled faintly of old paint and coffee from the cafe downstairs. The furniture was secondhand, the walls bare, but it was quiet. Peaceful. For the first time in years, no one questioned where I went, who I spoke to, or why I stayed up late. At night, I lay awake replaying the marriage in my head, not the beginning, when things were soft and hopeful, but the middle. The slow shift. The way his jokes had turned into insults disguised as concern. The way he insisted on handling the finances, because I was too emotional for numbers. The way documents disappeared from the house, replaced by explanations that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. I had looked closely. That was my mistake, and later, my advantage. I took a job that seemed unimpressive on paper. Consulting. Contract work. Nothing flashy. My ex-husband would have laughed if he knew. He liked titles, corner offices, visible success. He never understood quiet influence. Each morning, I dressed simply and left the apartment with my laptop and a notebook. I worked from cafes, shared spaces, anywhere that gave me a view of people moving through their lives, unaware of how fragile their certainty was. I reviewed contracts. I analyzed financial structures. I helped businesses identify risks they didn't know they were carrying. I listened. Weeks passed. Then months. News about my ex-husband started appearing online. Promotions. New investments. Photos of him smiling beside people who mattered. He had remarried quickly, to someone younger, someone who looked perfect beside him in carefully curated images. Our old house appeared in the background of those photos, renovated, brighter, transformed into a symbol of his fresh start. Friends sent me screenshots with awkward messages. I saw this and thought of you. Hope you're okay. He seems happy. I replied politely and closed the apps. What they didn't see were the small details hidden behind the headlines. The rushed acquisitions. The aggressive expansion. The way his new business partners overlapped in strange ways. Patterns most people ignored because success is loud and confidence is contagious. One afternoon, while reviewing a contract for a client, I recognized a familiar name. My ex-husband's company. He was listed as a majority stakeholder in a venture that was quietly absorbing smaller firms. I read every line carefully, my pulse steady. There it was. A clause buried deep in the agreement, one that transferred liability in a way that looked harmless but wasn't. A structure designed to protect him, on paper, but dangerously dependent on perfect compliance. The kind of setup that collapses if even one assumption fails. I smiled to myself. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. But because I finally saw the full picture. I took notes. I cross-referenced filings. I followed the trail through shell companies and partnerships that looked impressive on the surface but brittle underneath. It became clear that my ex-husband had built his post-divorce empire on speed and arrogance, trusting that no one would look too closely. He had always assumed I wouldn't. At night, I thought about the courtroom again. About how small I must have looked sitting there with nothing. How he must have enjoyed watching me walk out empty-handed. I wondered if he ever thought about what I was doing now. Probably not. That was the beauty of it. One evening, I received an email from a potential client, an investor considering a partnership with a company I recognized immediately. My ex-husband's company. The email was brief, professional, and cautious. We'd like an independent assessment, it read. Discreet. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Of course, I typed. Happy to help. I worked through the night, compiling everything I had learned. Not opinions. Not accusations. Just facts. Timelines. Financial exposures. Risks that couldn't be explained away once seen together. By morning, the report was finished. I sent it without commentary. 2 weeks later, the investor backed out of the deal. Then another. And another. Publicly, nothing seemed wrong. But behind the scenes, conversations shifted. Meetings were postponed. Lawyers were consulted. My ex-husband's name stopped appearing alongside certain influential figures. I heard about it indirectly, through industry chatter. Through clients who didn't know the connection. Through patterns repeating themselves quietly. Still, I said nothing. One night, my phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in months. I let it ring. Then again. Finally, I answered. What do you want? He asked, irritation barely masked. Hello to you too, I replied calmly. I've heard things, he said. People are pulling out. Deals are stalling. Someone's been spreading doubts. I leaned back in my chair. That sounds stressful. Don't do this, he snapped. You know exactly what I mean. I really don't, I said. I don't work in rumors. Silence stretched between us. You wouldn't understand this level of business anyway, he said finally, defaulting to the old script. I smiled, unseen. You're probably right. He hung up. I closed my laptop and looked around my small apartment. It still wasn't much, but it was mine. Every late night, every quiet observation, every piece of information I had gathered, it all belonged to me. He had taken everything in the divorce. Or so he thought. And as the world around him began to shift in ways he couldn't control, I realized something with startling clarity. The story wasn't even close to over. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday morning, hidden inside a bland business headline that most people would scroll past. Without a second glance, I saw it because I had trained myself to look for patterns, not drama. The article mentioned a delayed merger, citing unexpected due diligence concerns. No names were blamed, no accusations made. Just a pause. In my world, pauses mattered. I read the article twice, then set my phone down and finished my coffee slowly. Outside the cafe window, people hurried by, carrying bags, talking into phones, living inside their own urgencies. None of them knew that a carefully balanced structure was beginning to wobble, not because of one dramatic blow, but because of accumulated weight. That was always how collapses really happened. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was calm. The kind that comes when reality finally starts catching up to arrogance. Work continued as usual. I reviewed portfolios, advised clients, joined video calls where faces nodded seriously at charts and projections. I never mentioned my ex-husband. I never needed to. His name surfaced on its own often enough, drifting into conversations like an uninvited guest. Risk exposure seems higher than expected, one client said during a call. Yes, I replied evenly. That's because growth was prioritized over resilience. No one asked how I knew. They only listened. At night, memories returned in fragments. The way he used to dismiss my questions. The way he'd smile while explaining things incorrectly, confident I wouldn't challenge him. The way he'd say, "Trust me," whenever something didn't add up. I had trusted him. Once. I thought about the house sometimes. Not because I wanted it back, but because of what it represented. Control. Ownership. A visible marker of who won. He had made sure everyone knew he kept it. Renovated it. Posted photos of it glowing at sunset like a trophy. I wondered if the walls noticed the tension yet. A month passed. Then another. The quiet tightening continued. Regulators began asking questions, not accusations, just questions. The kind that require time, documents, explanations. Time was something my ex-husband had never liked to give. He liked speed, momentum, forward motion. Pressure changed him. I heard through a former colleague that he'd become irritable in meetings, snapping at advisors, overruling caution with confidence. That he was pushing harder, demanding loyalty, insisting that everything was under control. That was when I knew he was scared. Fear makes people reckless, especially those who mistake dominance for strength. One evening, as I was closing my laptop, an email notification popped up. The sender's name made my chest tighten, not with pain, but with surprise. His lawyer. The message was polite, formal, and careful. Too careful. They wanted to discuss unresolved financial discrepancies from the divorce settlement. Apparently, new information had come to light suggesting certain assets had been mischaracterized. I laughed softly to myself. So he had finally looked back. I didn't reply immediately. I let the email sit for 2 days, unread, while I went about my routine. On the third day, I responded with a single sentence. Please specify. The reply came quickly this time, longer, more defensive. They claimed there may have been oversights in the valuation of shared ventures during the marriage. They asked for cooperation, transparency, good faith, words he had never once used when we were married. I agreed to meet, not because I was obligated to, but because I wanted to see his face when he realized something had shifted. The meeting took place in a sleek office downtown, all glass walls and neutral colors meant to signal professionalism and power. He arrived late, as usual. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The confidence was still there, but thinner now. Stretched over irritation. His suit was impeccable, but his eyes flicked too often toward his lawyer, as if seeking reassurance. He didn't smile this time. We exchanged polite greetings and sat across from each other. For a moment, no one spoke. Then his lawyer began outlining concerns, referencing documents, timelines, numbers. I listened quietly. When it was my turn, I slid a folder across the table. Not thick, not dramatic, just precise. I believe this addresses your concerns, I said calmly. The lawyer opened it and began reading. I watched his expression change, not dramatically, but subtly. Brows tightening, lips pressing together. My ex-husband leaned forward. What is that? He demanded. Documentation, I replied. Records of advisory work I've done over the past year. Public filings. Independent analyses. You weren't supposed to. He stopped himself. I tilted my head slightly. Wasn't supposed to what? Silence. The lawyer cleared his throat. It appears, he said carefully, that some of the assets considered sole property after the divorce may be exposed to external liabilities that predate the settlement. My ex-husband stared at him. That's impossible. It's not, the lawyer said. And if challenged, it could raise questions about disclosure. I met my ex-husband's eyes for the first time since sitting down. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. You did this, he said quietly. I didn't deny it. I paid attention, I said. There's a difference. The meeting ended shortly after. There were no raised voices, no dramatic exits. Just tension hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. As I walked out of the building, I felt lighter. Not because I had hurt him, but because I had finally stood on equal ground. Weeks later, the consequences began surfacing publicly. An audit, a lawsuit from a former partner, news articles that no longer used flattering language. His name appeared alongside words like scrutiny and irregularities. Still no definitive collapse, but the shine was gone. Friends stopped sharing his posts. Invitations dried up. The world that had once welcomed him so eagerly began stepping back, careful not to be too close. One afternoon, I received a message from his new wife. Short, emotional, accusatory. What did you do to him? I stared at the screen, then typed and erased several replies before settling on the truth. I did nothing, I wrote. I stopped protecting him. I blocked the number after that. Life shifted again, quietly. My work expanded. Referrals increased. People valued my discretion, my ability to see beneath surfaces. I was invited into rooms I never would have entered before, not as someone's spouse, not as a supporting character, but as a voice. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about how close I had come to disappearing completely. How easily his version of the story could have been the only one that survived. He had taken everything in the divorce because he believed possession was power. He never understood that awareness was. And as his carefully constructed world continued to fracture under the weight of its own lies, I moved forward, steady, prepared, and finally free, knowing that the final outcome hadn't revealed itself yet. But it was coming. The call came early in the morning, just as the city was waking up. I recognized the number immediately, though I hadn't saved it. Some connections leave an imprint you don't need a label for. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Tired. Stripped of the sharp confidence that once filled every room he entered. We need to talk, he said. I didn't respond right away. I stood by the window, watching sunlight slide between buildings, illuminating dust in the air. For a moment, I wondered how many times I had waited for this exact call during our marriage, back when I wanted explanations, honesty, effort. Timing changes everything. I'm listening, I said finally. He exhaled, long and shaky. Things aren't going well. I almost smiled, not out of cruelty, but recognition. Those words had lived in my chest for years while he refused to hear them. He went on, talking fast now, tripping over his own sentences. Investors pulling back, legal fees piling up, the house, our old house, now leveraged against debts he hadn't planned for. He said my name like it was a lifeline. I need your help. There it was. The moment he had never imagined, standing on the other side of power, asking the woman he discarded to save him. I closed my eyes and let myself remember everything. The courtroom laughter, the way he had smirked when the judge ruled in his favor. The certainty with which he told me I'd never recover, never matter, never rise again. I can't, I said softly. The silence on the other end was heavy, stunned. You owe me, he said, reflexively. The old instinct, the old entitlement. I don't, I replied. You made sure of that. His voice cracked. If you don't help, I'll lose everything. I thought of the nights I lay awake calculating bills while he made promises he never kept. The years I dimmed myself so he could feel taller. The way he took everything and still wanted more. I already lost everything once, I said. And I survived. I ended the call before he could speak again. The fallout was swift after that. Court filings became public. Articles grew sharper, no longer careful with their language. Former allies distanced themselves, issuing statements full of concern and disappointment. His lawyer withdrew. Then another. The narrative shifted, and once it did, it never stopped moving. One afternoon, a colleague forwarded me a news alert. His company had entered restructuring. Assets frozen. Investigations ongoing. I read it once. Then I closed the app and went back to work. There was no rush of victory. No moment of dramatic satisfaction. Just a deep, steady sense of completion. Like closing a door that had been banging in the wind for years. Months later, I ran into him by accident. It was at a small cafe across town, the kind of place no one went to be seen. He looked older. Not just physically, something inside him had collapsed, leaving a hollow behind his eyes. He noticed me as I stood to leave. For a second, he looked like he might turn away. Then he nodded, awkwardly. You look good, he said. So do you, I lied politely. We stood there, two people connected by history but no longer by anything else. No anger surged. No need to say what had already been proven by time. I didn't think you'd end up like this, he admitted quietly. I met his gaze, calm and unflinching. Neither did I. When we were married, he swallowed hard. I was wrong about you. I considered that, then shook my head gently. No, you never really looked. I left him there, surrounded by half-drunk coffee and regrets he couldn't refinance. That night, as I walked through my own home, a place I had bought myself, filled with light and quiet and intention, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud, messy, fueled by rage. What happened to him was consequence. He took everything in the divorce because he thought taking was the same as winning. He never understood that stripping someone down doesn't make them weak, it shows them exactly what they're capable of rebuilding. I had let them think I was broken. But broken things can be remade. And this time, I rebuilt myself into someone he could never control, never outmaneuver, and never recover from underestimating again. That was the part of the story he never saw coming.